Hi again, and welcome to this lesson on The Tyger by William Blake. Even though it's spelled with a Y, it's still pronounced Tyger. It's just like an old-fashioned spelling, in case you're wondering. When I first saw this poem, I had that kind of question in my head, so I thought I'd just deal with it before I go into any of the actual specifics. As a specific poem, I love this one, and I've been quite into it since I was maybe about 12 or 13. Just find it quite crazy in a certain way. It's really interesting, and it, for me as a kid anyway, it sort of captured like a kind of fascination with nature and the environment and animals. I've always been super into those. I used to run a dog rescue, so with like kind of wild dogs that I'd save. So so it kind of captures that like fascination with how things can be, evolved into something so complex as a tiger or a predatory animal, that kind of thing. And also generally just how the world, how much there's, how much, I'm not even explaining it properly because it just like baffles me when I think about it, but how sort of varied nature is in the world, how many different types of animals and plants and stuff there is out there that's going on, as well as things that are now extinct that used to exist. It just really, when you start thinking about it, makes your head sort of spin a little bit like mine did there. So William Blake, I feel, has this kind of similar response when he starts thinking about a tiger. You have to remember that he's writing in the 1700s. This is quite a while ago. It's not the kind of time when, tigers were like, I could probably drive half an hour from my house and go see a tiger if I wanted in a zoo somewhere. I don't think in William Blake's time this was that possible. So he'd have been aware of tigers without actually being kind of able to see one or be near one at any time. Weirdly, my cat's just arrived. So she must know that we're doing the tiger. I'm going to just leave her here, so if she meows, basically that's what why you hear a meow. So the first thing to do with any poem is read it aloud to yourself, especially this one. It's got some really powerful sounds in it. So pause me now and read the poem aloud. Don't worry if you can't pronounce certain things, I'll help you with the vocab afterwards. The main thing is to get a sense of the style, the rhythm, the patterning of the words, maybe other types of phonetic techniques. So there's a lot of alliteration, there's a lot of plosive sounds like D, B, that type of thing. So as you read through, try and get a feeling for that. And then when you're ready, we can come back and do some analysis. She's just quietly purring, my cat, so she's not meowed yet. I'm kind of hoping she meows. It'd be kind of fun for this lesson. It's topical. So vocab then. There's not too many weird words. There's a couple of old-fashioned words, so words that we call kind of archaic because they've not carried on into modern usage. So thee, thy, thine, these are all archaisms. ARCHISM, in case you're wanting to use that as a technique when you analyze it. Thy means your, thee means you, and thine means your. Yes, there are a lot of words that mean you or your in Old English. Or it's not even Old English, it's kind of like Middle English, kind of moving into modern English. A couple of other words. Immortal. This gets repeated, immortal. It means living forever. So mortal means you have a kind of fixed life and you eventually die. Immortal is like you're godlike or transcendent. You'll live, forever. And he's not talking about the tiger. He's not saying the tiger is immortal. He's saying what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry. So what immortal thing made you? What kind of God could possibly think, I know, I'm going to sit here and make something as beautiful and crazy and dangerous and wild as a tiger. So he's thinking about the thing that made the tiger when he says that word. frame means put a frame around. But in this case, again, thinking of that from Blake's point of view, the God that would have made the tiger, he's thinking, how have you condensed your idea of a tiger into a shape? How have you put a frame around it, made it solid, gone from the idea of creating something like a tiger to the physical reality of it? Symmetry is when things are symmetrical, so they balance equally. If you do maths and you're good at it, you probably know what symmetry is from maths. And sinew, finally, is kind of, we think of it as like stiff muscle, I suppose, but it's technically like the connecting tissue in your body between muscles. So yeah, it's that kind of like tough, muscly stuff. I'm not a biologist, you can probably tell. So even though we've got loads of different stanzas, I've kind of just condensed it into a summary of what's going on here, because I feel like the stanzas are quite short, so there's no need to kind of go one by one through them. Basically what happens is the speaker is talking to a tiger. So the addressee is the tiger. He's quite scared of him, but he asks an important question. What kind of God could dare make something like you? So beautiful, so powerful, so terrifying. Those three adjectives are quite interesting because we don't normally think of beautiful things as terrifying, and we often also don't think of beautiful things as necessarily powerful. So yeah, he's combining the ideas of beauty, terror, and power. We call this sublime. So this is a really important word to use in this one. The tiger produces a sublime reaction in the poet, in the speaker. He respects it, he fears it, and he's also in shock at how beautiful it might be, or it is. Sublime is actually something that romantic poets are really interested in, and William Blake is classed as a romantic poet. So all of them, there's 6 in total, romantic poets, they all talk a lot about the sublime, and that's one of their main themes or topics as well. So in stanza 2, he says, did the God that made you take you from fire or from skies or ocean? Like where did he get the inspiration or even the physical matter to produce you, to create you as a tiger? He says in stanza 3 that it's art, the way that he's been created. And stanza 4, he thinks about maybe the tiger was crafted in the same way that a human might craft something in a fire, like a blacksmith working with raw metal might create something beautiful out of that metal. And then we have this idea of the stars. The stars must have created the tiger's beauty. And maybe the God that made the tiger was really like happy and proud after he'd made him. He looked back on his creation and was like, wow, I've done well here. He also says, I wonder how the same God could make something as gentle as a lamb and as fierce as a tiger. Seems really crazy that both of these things happened. And obviously you can see that the way that I'm analysing it is from a highly religious perspective. This is because Blake is a highly religious poet, so you kind of have to get in his own head and how does he think about the world in order to understand what's going on in that poem. But if you're non-religious, you can kind of apply the same type of logic to the way that you view science and nature. So you don't necessarily have to think of it as a God creating that tiger. You might think, isn't evolution wonderful? The way that things can go from very small, simple organisms into something as complex as a tiger. It should produce the same kind of fascination and shock when you start on that type of thinking process as a spiritual person who believes that a God would have made the tiger. Or you may also believe in God and also evolution, because all of these things are possible. So with any poem, try and apply your own belief system to it, but also get inside the belief system of the creator of that poem to understand, like, how are they really thinking? So the speaker then, Blake himself, it's quite obviously the poet himself who's speaking. This isn't the case with every poem, but in this one I think we can say that it's just a direct response to Blake's own kind of wonder at the world and how complex it is, and the God that he thinks made that world. He appreciates the tiger, but by appreciating how beautiful and crazy the tiger is, he also appreciates the God behind it that made that tiger. So we have this really important idea, which again is a romantic capital R idea, which the romantic poets often play around with, which is that if you look into something in the natural world and you find beauty and complexity there, and you appreciate that, you're actually appreciating the God behind that physical thing that you're looking at. So they see things like science as a way of better understanding and appreciating God. The more that you understand the world around you and the more respect you have for that, the more you're actually kind of worshipping your God that you believe in. So we have this idea that everything that you feel when you come into contact with something beautiful and complex in nature then extends beyond that to the God itself that created that natural thing. One thing that I looked this up because I was like, I'm not sure about this. So he talks about the symmetry. Tigers don't actually have symmetrical patterning, which I think makes them even more crazy, because they're like, each tiger's stripes is a bit like a thumbprint where it's unique and it's not regular. So one side of a tiger will be striped a different way to the other side, which I think is really blows my mind. But at the time that Blake was writing, it kind of looked, I think he thought that it was symmetrical. So he's trying to be a little bit scientific about it there. His science is a little bit inaccurate, but that always happens as people go through and progress and learn more about the world. Got quite a lot of techniques here. I'm going to kind of whiz through them and briefly touch on them. Feel free to just pause and read my full analysis, or if you're on the Scribbly School, you can download this and kind of look through it in your own time. I want to just give you a flavour of the types of techniques that you can use and what you can say about them. So there's a lot of rhetorical questions. What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? He keeps saying what, obviously. So he's kind of thinking it's just that question, like, what on earth? Like, how can this be? It's sort of almost overwhelming, the amount of questions he asks. And it's rhetorical. He's talking to the tiger and he doesn't expect a god to answer back at him. He's just kind of trying to figure it out in his own mind, I think, how this tiger could exist. And then he says, did he who made the lamb make thee? So we're talking about tigers and lambs, but also there's a double interpretation of this noun lamb, because it's an allegorical reference to Jesus, who in the Bible is called the Lamb very often. So he's called the Lamb of God. So it's kind of this idea of like, Jesus has this very mild, good and pure nature. He's peaceful and he's, anti-violence. And then the same God that obviously is present in the idea of Jesus made this like really crazy, violent, powerful, huge, giant tiger thing that just like destroys its prey and rips it apart and eats it. So he's like shocked at the idea of something so violent as a tiger existing in nature. So the like latent violent potential or brutal potential of nature is quite an important specific theme in this poem as well. How can nature be so brutal and so crazy, but also be so gentle and so sweet and so on? There's a semantic field of smithing, not smithing. It's to do with being a smith, like a blacksmith. So furnace, hammer, chain, anvil. It's all this idea of the god, the creator that he's envisaging, which is actually more of like a Greek, Roman, classical idea than a specifically Christian idea. This idea of God as a blacksmith who's got all these tools and he's crafting the world. It's a little bit like Hephaestus, who's a god of fire and crafting in Greek myth. So he's kind of actually paralleling or kind of applying ideas from classical myth and merging those with ideas from his Christian religion as well. There's another semantic field of terror, which relates to the sublime. There's apostrophe. where he's actually directly speaking to the tiger. Tiger means that he's speaking specifically to the tiger. He's addressing the tiger. So even though obviously while Blake's writing this poem, he knows we're going to read it, he's writing it for the tiger to hear, which is kind of a bit of a weird thing when you think about it. He's asking ontological questions. Ontological is a bit of a tricky word, so look that up if you're not sure. But it's to do with philosophy and existence. And again, this is if you're coming from a more atheistic perspective, this is like more of an angle into the text than if you were trying to analyze it from a religious one, if that religious one doesn't suit you. So ontology is about existence. How is life created? What is the nature of existence? And so on. This one is quite important, I think, the visual imagery. This was what I found really powerful about it when I first read this poem. I actually painted a picture of a tiger and then put lines from this poem around it for one of my art pieces at GCSE. So yeah, I was like super into this poem. Yeah, so burning bright in the forests of the night. There's certain aspects of this poem that are really visual and they help us imagine the tiger, but we also imagine them in this very wild landscape. So in the time when Blake's writing, only the most civilized, educated people would be able to read this poem, and they would likely live in quite built up areas, like a city maybe. He lived in London himself, or they might live in towns, but they live in this kind of like human bubble where we protect everything and we're safe from the wild. And he's asking us, and he's imagining himself to just like place ourselves in a dark forest in nighttime and think about what would it feel like if you're just by yourself and you come across a tiger and it's this like giant flash of orange in the middle of the darkness. So there's this idea of like the fiery power of the tiger, the fact that it's kind of illuminating. It's like such a powerful kind of energy that it's sort of like this illuminating force within the dark forest, but also how wild and frightening it is, that idea, especially to people in Blake's time who were obsessed with being refined and civilized and, no longer savage, to kind of place us back in this savage moment where we're like, what if we're in a jungle and we see a tiger? So yeah, it's quite powerful when you think about the visual imagery and you analyze that there. Got quite a lot of form structure points as well here for you. There's this idea of a refrain, which is important. So refrains are similar to a chorus, something that repeats. We have this beginning and the end of the poem being framed itself by the refrain. And he changes one word there. So he goes from could frame thy fearful symmetry to dare frame. So once he's thought about it a bit longer, he starts and he's like, what thing could possibly make you? And then he's going through all the different things that a tiger does. And then he's like, what thing would dare make you? So if you want really good points in an essay with this one, you want to analyze the difference between the conditional verb could and then the active verb dare. Who would dare make you is a very kind of powerful thing. Like how on earth, like however scary the tiger is, the god that made a tiger must be 10 times scarier to not be scared of it enough to make it, if that makes sense. I think that's what Blake's thinking. He's like, whoa, how scary the god behind this tiger must be if he's fine with making a tiger. There's a very strict rhyme scheme, AABB. So we have this kind of quatrain structure with 4-line stanzas, and every 4-line stanzas is an AABB rhyme scheme. So we call these couplets, rhyming couplets. Usually couplets are used in love poems to show kind of harmony. But in this way, I think Blake's using them to show his like love and appreciation for nature, for the natural world, for even maybe the powerful and dangerous and violent bits of the natural world. We have this idea of showing his love and appreciation for the God that he sees behind the creation of that nature as well. And there's a sense of extreme regularity here. partly that's the time. It was popular to write regular poems in this time. There wasn't like a free verse kind of random structure possible, but also it shows this sense of like, I think he's trying to make sense of something very complex and difficult and abstract and almost not logical. Like, it seems like too much to make a tiger. It's too powerful and too kind of crazy. So he's trying to make sense of something, and for that reason he puts it into a regular structure. So I've not done this for all of the poems, but I feel like with this one, going into the attitudes, the opinions of the writer is quite important. So I've put these here. I have touched on these already, so I'm not going to go into them again now, but it kind of just summarizes the like messages behind this poem for you, which you really need to go into if you're going to write an essay on it. Like, you need to be sensitive to what is he trying to tell us behind the story. And that's the same for every piece of literature that you study. So feel free to pause and look through these if you're still not that clear on like why, what is the point of the poem. And yeah, I've kind of written them out for you there. As a final thing, we'll just have a look at some context and some themes. The main context, which I touched on, is romanticism. So Blake is a romantic poet with a capital R. That doesn't mean romantic like he loves, you know, he's romantic like he brings flowers to his wife or whatever. It means romantic as in he's a romantic poet of a certain time period, and he has certain themes and concerns that are typical of these poets. So some of those themes, definitely nature, definitely spirituality and the connection between them. So romantic poets saw the natural world as an expression of how powerful their God was. The idea of the sublime, questions about creation and existence are all present in this poem. Another thing that's quite interesting is that Blake specifically, he had these kind of dreams and visions of gods and angels speaking to him. And nowadays we might have actually said that he was schizophrenic or he had psychosis, something like that, where he might have been diagnosed as having a mental health disorder. But at the time, he just sort of saw himself as a kind of prophet almost of his religion. And a lot of his art that he creates, because he does really cool drawings and paintings, and a lot of his poetry that he creates is a kind of expression of those visions that he had in his dreams and so on. So perhaps, I'm not 100% sure on this one, but perhaps he had this really strong vision of this tiger and he felt compelled to write about it. But definitely his inspiration comes from his kind of religious beliefs and background. So that concludes our analysis of the Tyger. Hopefully you're happy to write essays on this one now. Hopefully you've got a load of ideas and you're feeling quite confident on the language as well. Thank you for listening. Hopefully it was enjoyable. My cat's now asleep on my desk, having not mewed, so I'm kind of disappointed in her. I wish she'd meowed. But yeah, I will see you guys soon in a future Scribbly lesson, I'm sure.